But I agree. I think there are some people that we are not supposed to recover. I don't want to recover those people. These people should die.
Now, I want to talk about law and order. In Britain, we've imported millions of migrants from the third world, and many have suggested this has led to a breakdown in law and order, a breakdown in social trust. In Brazil, I know you have similar problems. How do you create a high trust society?
First of all, Brazil is a country with like very low trust among the citizens. People don't trust on each other, and we must start from something. And first of all, we need to start with law and order, enforcing some sort of behavior. And after that, this kind of behavior becomes a self-discipline, and self-discipline becomes, after a while, culture. We need to create a culture of trust. When you walk around in some towns in Brazil, people sometimes don't behave properly. Sometimes people are noisy. Sometimes people are violent. It's also because of a culture that we start to believe, especially from the 60s and the 70s, that we are very extroverted, funny people, and the world see Brazilians as that kind of party people. And when you put it together with lack of law and order, and also when you join to this element the fact that the crime, especially the cartels, risen to power in many cities, then we start to have like a mix that's pretty complicated. So first of all, we need to destroy the cartels. Second, we need to enforce law and order. And third, the elites, the top of our society, should behave properly, because also we have a problem in terms of elites, cultural problems. And I think we can start to raise a culture that's based on trust and correct behaviors.
In El Salvador, President Bukele has arrested tens of thousands of gang members and criminals and put them in these vast prisons across the country. This has come under some criticism for supposedly hurting human rights against the criminals or those accused of being a criminal. Would you copy President Bukele's sort of system and apply that to Brazil?
Well, in many ways, what we must do is kind of the same thing Bukele has done in El Salvador. The situation here is different because the extension of the the crime operation from those cartels is much higher, much bigger in Brazil. I'll give an example. They are not only occupying chunks of the Brazilian territory, but also they are inside the police, they are inside the judiciary system, inside the political system. So we must use not only force to put them out of those areas. And we have the force, our police guys, they are really, really good on it. Actually, we need to change the legal system of Brazil, but also use intelligence. So we need to dismantle the financial organization that those guys have also that works behind the curtains. So I know they have very strong ties to our judiciary system, and we must use like political intelligence to destroy it. So I think this Brazilian situation is, in terms of the way we use the strength, it's not a big concern. We can destroy them like easily in a matter of months, having a proper legislation. The question is how to enforce it against the institutional work that those cartels are making in Brazil. We have a strategy for that, but most of all, like let's say we're gonna be just like Bukele in 60 or 70% of what we are gonna do in Brazil.
In principle, do you agree that locking up a small percentage of the population massively reduces crime? Because that's essentially has been the El Salvadorian model, where you have a very small, sort of relatively small population who are committing almost all of these violent crimes. Do you agree with that principle of targeting those people and things will get a lot better?
For sure. The people who commit crime, they are reincidents. They used to commit the same crimes a long time. They are also the same people in the same areas. We know where they come from. We know how are the families where those people belong. For example, most of them are young men coming from families who lives in poor areas without the father figure. They don't have a present father when they are young. So those boys are used to be like cooptated by the cartels, and they become the young criminals, the young workforce that starts to work for the cartels. So when we intervene, we put that kind of guys who are like part of those cartels in jail. We change the penalties for violent crimes, so we raise the penalties a lot, the time people spend in jail, and also the reinstance, the fact that a guy commits like crimes in series should be punished like much more than we are already doing in Brazil. In Brazil, reincidents are not properly punished, so they know that they are rewarded by a very weak legal system. So for sure, it works, and it gives an example. Also, there's a professor that made a study in Brazil showing that interviewing like people in jail, and they were saying, look, if there's like a penalty that will put me in jail for the rest of my life, I will not commit crimes anymore. I don't want to stay here. So they feel that the Brazilian legislation right now is easy, but if it changes, they will not commit crimes. I think it's just like everywhere. It's not a matter of Brazil. It's everywhere.
What about the death penalty? Do you support the death penalty for serious crimes?
Yes, I agree with that penalty. Sometimes it's a taboo. It's like in the under this Brazilian constitution, it's not possible unless we completely change it. But I agree. I think there are some people that we are not supposed to recover. I don't want to recover those people. These people should die.
Are you a fan of Lee Kuan Yew and his reforms in Singapore? He was famously enamoured by the British high trust society of the 1940s and 1950s, and he applied the same, or this kind of model to Singapore, which was incredibly authoritarian and had no there was no toleration of even low-level crimes like spitting in the street and things like that. Are you looking to him for inspiration?
Lee Kuan Yew is a great inspiration, I think, for everyone in this new right-wing movement across the world, because he was someone who created that kind of like first law and order. The law and order create a behavior. The behavior becomes a discipline, and this discipline becomes a culture. But first of all, it must become as a taboo, and a taboo must be reinforced with force in the beginning. And we even have experience like that in Brazil. We have like a town from the 19th century in Brazil that received a law from the emperor that if people like don't clean their houses, the front of their houses, they're gonna be punished. They're gonna be fined. So what happened? People, first of all, they were afraid, so they were cleaning the streets, and it was a very poor town in the north of Brazil, very poor town. And it became a discipline, and now it's a culture. Is one of the most beautiful towns in the north of Brazil, even though it's not a rich country. But just because they have a discipline, the town is much better, so it attracted better people, and the town became richer than the towns in the same area, which is like a kind of desert in the north of Brazil. So it works. It's a formula that makes sense, and it created also a high trust society, and let's say in the middle of one of the poorest areas in our country. So for sure, it's a model that we should explore. You should use here in Brazil.
Brazil is a vast country with a huge population, obviously a lot of poverty and corruption, and you have these favelas and so on, and as you say, the cartels. Is any of this stuff actually possible in a country of Brazil's size and nature? Obviously, El Salvador and Singapore are very, very small places with very small populations. Maybe it's much easier for a government there to apply these strict rules, whereas Brazil is both geographically massive and also has a huge population.
Yeah. Actually, is not that hard. Our problem is that our elites doesn't have like will or strength to do what must be done. We're talking about like 25 million people living on favelas in Brazil. We have a population of more than 200 million. It's not that we are like totally poor. We're not poor. It's a low middle class country. These people in favela also, they're not like living like in proper slums. It's like poor houses with no proper urban structure. So it's not that we are starting from scratch, starting from zero. We don't need to put down most of the houses. We need to turn them into neighborhoods. So it will cost for Brazil around 900 billion reais. Let's say around not even $200 billion in 10 years to solve this problem. So if we solve our fiscal matters in Brazil and we have political will, we can do it. Like we really can do it. Also, the favelas in Brazil, they were generated by the lack of capability of Brazil to enforce law and order and to build infrastructure, especially during the 80s and the 90s, and also because we had like a population boom happening in those times. Right now, the population is not growing that much anymore, so there's not a lot of pressure over the big towns in Brazil. Like, so people are not like building new favelas all around. So like we have time, we have technology, but we don't have political will in Brazil. There's a problem that we start to believe that we are favela. You know, there's all those foreigners like traveling to Brazil. They come say, "Oh, the football it comes from favela. Favela is our culture. Look how cool Brazil is." And even the foreigners they start to behave like favela people here. So it's bizarre. We are not favela people. Brazilians are like a hardworking people. Brazilians live in normal. How we have our proper architecture, which is like some sort of colonial Portuguese architecture adapted to our tropical environment. So we have our culture is not a favela culture. It's just like it's a fact. It's a matter of a country that start to believe that its problems they have some sort of inner strength, which is not true. It's just a problem, and we must solve it.
What about freedom of speech in Brazil? Can you sort of say your mind? Are you worried about being targeted? I know that you're running for the presidency later this year. Are you worried about being targeted by the authorities?
Well, we don't have freedom of speech at all in Brazil. Brazil is one of the most complicated countries in those terms, and it's even bizarre because we were always a country like where people were making jokes about everything. It was always a free country in many ways, free in many subjects, sexually free and anything. But this woke, like, how can I say, woke bullshit. I don't know if it's a proper or correct thing to say as a candidate, but this woke bullshit became like very strong on the judiciary. They became part of what Curtis Yarvin says, the cathedral. So the cathedral enforced it in the whole country. And also they enforced it over the social media company, those big tech companies like Meta, Google. So sometimes you produce a content on the internet and it just vanishes, it disappears. They just put it down. I can't say that it's that hard as in Britain. In England, things are worse from what I've heard. But in Brazil, I think in the so-called West, because Brazil is not properly West, but let's say it's part of our West influence sphere. It from the first place in terms of uh, lack of freedom of speech comes Britain, second Brazil.
And you mentioned Britain. When you look at Britain's immigration policies, like I mentioned before, bringing in millions of people from Africa and Asia, from very poor third world countries, do you think this is a good idea? Do you think that Britain should be, and other Western countries, should be importing these very poor migrants into their nations?
No, you guys are just killing yourselves. It's a suicidal strategy. I don't even know how come all this discussion just became common right now. The first time I went to Europe, and I've been in Britain as well, I could see this cultural problem, let's say, about those immigrants, those problems with violence you guys were having. But not only in Britain, I saw in Germany, I saw in Sweden, I saw in Denmark. And when I start like talking to like random people, streets friends that I had there, they couldn't say anything. It was in the beginning of the 2000s. It was a taboo. They couldn't say it was a problem, but it was clear that it was a problem. And well, now people are having to deal with the problem when the problem is really big. The problem is big. How you guys will be able to remigrate most of these people, and the fact that many of them are just integrated, economically integrated. So how you will keep yourselves being the country of the Britain, the country of the Anglo, and in the middle of this liberal argument that like nations are just like a condominium where everyone can live. No, nations are a place where your country, your culture, your values, our people live. And people kind of forgot it after the Second World War. Let's say the liberal order post Second World War created a problem for Europe and United States, and it's a problem that you guys have to deal. I really don't agree with the immigration policy that the Western world had in the last 50 years.
In terms of the perception of Britain and other Western European countries in Brazil, I'm guessing that most Brazilians don't care about Western Europe, wouldn't probably have very little thoughts on Britain or whatever. But do you think that our standing around the world has declined? Do you think that there used to be perhaps a more respectful view, or kind of people were more enamored by Britain and other countries than they are today?
Actually, Brazilians have a very good view of Europe, especially Europe, more than the United States. Brazilians, like, they want to consume and behave like Americans, but they aspire to be like Europeans. Especially in from the center to the south of Brazil, where you had a lot of Italian, some German, Portuguese, Spanish immigration. So people try to like integrate themselves with like European heritage. So it was always okay. Also, like Brazilians practice football, which is the favorite sport in Europe. So we were kind of integrated to this sphere. For sure, like Brazilians start to feel a decline in Europe. Now Brazilians are talking much more about China and much more, and it's natural. China became like a superpower, but the kind of partnership Brazil had with Europe will not be the same with China. China is a different kind of country, and it has a different behavior. So we need to think of how can we reintegrate with Europe, understanding the moments that Europe had, and how can Europe be useful for Brazil and Brazil useful for Europe. Most of the time, like we receive also lots of penalties from France that is not a friend of Brazil at all. France used to fight the Brazilian agriculture internationally on international forums. The French used to like to organize all those international campaigns against Brazil because Brazil burned the Amazon rainforest, which is a lie. Brazil preserves most of the rainforests. It's just like they're just bullshitting, especially Macron, but they use it to strengthen their positions. So Brazil and Europe should like improve their relationship for sure. But Europe, what I feel, is not in a strong position nowadays. And well, it's because of the decisions Europeans took in the last years.
Okay, Mr. Santos, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
We really was a great opportunity to be here with you.
Onça Cortadora. Cortes MBL. Missão